Hey everybody, Scott Stevens here, live on a Monday late afternoon, evening, depending on where you are, but nevertheless, it is Monday. And been quite a nice day across the states with not too hot, not too cool, some good rains where we've needed some rains, and clear skies, at least for me last night. Yeah, I'm bragging just a little bit. We've been here in southern Colorado where the monsoon has been here where I am. I haven't necessarily had a whole lot of moisture out of it, but we've had the cooler weather, we've had the occasional showers, and that kind of thing. But we haven't been able to necessarily generate what I would like to say is beneficial rains. We've had a little bit here and there, but what I'm trying to get to is I saw the comet last night. We finally had some clear skies, and so I was able to stay out and had a little birthday party with some friends, and then out in the open because I'm up in the mountains and I've got trees and I've got hills and I've got blockages. And so once we're out on the flats, we waited 10 o'clock. Skies were trying to clear. Stars were certainly coming into view, but by 10:30, it was dark enough. The comet's still bright enough, magnitude 3, if you're familiar with the magnitude system, with some of the brightest stars about -1, Venus about -4, the sun about -26, full moon about -12, naked eye visibility right about +5, 5.5. So the comet was about +3. So if you've got light pollution, you're going to have a tough time seeing it. If you've even got a good pair of 7 by, say, 35 millimeter binoculars, it will do absolute wonders for your ability to see this comet. So it's worth the effort. You will need to be south of about 53 degrees latitude and then north of I don't know, 25, 30 degrees, but it's definitely not, Tracy, unfortunately, a southern hemisphere event. It's got to be, you've got to be farther north. And then you can't even go too far north because up there the sun isn't setting this time of day and it stays perpetual twilight. So there's just this little band where it's a bit, where it's visible, but definitely it is worth the sight. Now, being an astronomer, I saw Hale-Bopp, and that was back in '97. Hyakutake also in '97, and then Halley's Comet back in '86. So it's been a little while, probably 23 years, at least for us Northern Hemisphere folks, since we've seen a comet that was kind of worthy of making the effort. And even this picture up near Yellowstone, where there's just a little bit of light on the horizon, and the stars, even the faint stars, are definitely in view. And we do have a sodium trail, the energetic trail with the dust always pointing away from the sun, always pointing away from the sun. So that's kind of get you where you go. All right. Kind of saw this coming up today where the United Arab Emirates of all nations launched its Hope spacecraft in a historic first mission to Mars. And they used the Japanese launch facility. So that's kind of cool to see other nations getting in on the game. There really should be a space race once again. We've got the technology, we've got the computers, we've got the know-how. Heck, it's just rocketry. That was largely, I don't want to say perfected, but the trajectory and forces and the math was done. That was accomplished during World War II and then refined in the 50s and then enough so that we put man on board in the 60s and then reached the moon or not, depending on your point of view, as we got deeper into the 60s and certainly in the 70s. So, the math is done. It's just about the willpower to spend a little money on exploration. And I'm a big fan of exploration. All right, as we U.S. heads into her peak hurricane season, a reduction in commercial airline flights due to COVID-19 has significantly impacted our ability to accurately forecast the weather. Why, might you ask? Well, on every single one of these airplanes, even though by and large they fly through a rather thin part of the atmosphere between about 29,000 feet and 37,000 feet, they're always reporting their location, their direction, their speed, and atmospheric conditions. And all of that data is constantly streaming back into ingestion centers where the data is sorted out and then used as raw materials into the models. So it's kind of important that we have that data available. And so with a reduction of the commercial air fleet to your airborne miles is down by like 90%. I know it's begun to come back up and will probably plateau very soon as we realize what we can and can't do because of this COVID thing. But nonetheless, we have seen a reduction in some of the models. Accuracy now that we've been missing a big chunk of this data over the last little while. Okay, so you see a little thunderstorm out there, head out into the deck, the balcony, just to, turn on the iPhone and get a little shot. And yeah, you get a little more than you expected. A nice little strike of lightning just real close nearby. We'll let that roll by one more time without my finger in the way, my cursor. And you'll be able to see that baby strike really close. And, when you count to half a second and you've already got that thunder, that's a little bit of a boom. All right, we're headed into tropical season, and the waters in the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico are warm. They are very warm. And if we're going to see something spin up, it would be over these warms: Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico over here, Central America, and so forth and so on. And so where we see the brighter red is where we have those temperatures, which are just nice and toasty. And there is a little bit of a potential of an outlook on the northern part of the island of Hispaniola. And if it heads towards the west-northwest, we could see some development, but still probabilities at this particular point in time remain on the low side. And the flooding rains in China go on. We'll deal with that a little bit more in another perspective coming up in a few minutes. Good to see Tracy, Robin, and Karen coming online with a little Monday catch up. The Yangtze, or China, blast the dam on the Yangtze tributary to ease the flooding as the death toll over there climbs to about 150. And then this major explosion at the Stromboli volcano in Italy. And that baby has gone off a few times, semi-recently, but nevertheless, anytime we see a volcanic eruption, it kind of gets people's attention. All right, back to the jet stream, and let's head to the northern hemisphere. We'll go down under in just a moment. But the big ridge that's been in place across northwestern Siberia. All right, here's the North Pole, just so you get your orientation. We're kind of right there in the middle, and we're looking down. So we've got Africa over here, Arabia here, and then we headed to Eurasia, and then China in this direction. All of that is the Pacific, and then the Atlantic here, just so you can get your orientation. Because if we don't, and these guys do not color their maps, it'd be nice to see just a little bit of a tinge of blue to give people a clue as to where the oceans are, so we can more quickly get our bearings. But what I'm seeing, a lot of blue, and those are locations where the jet stream is cooler than normal. And so truly only two bigger highs, but they're not persisting highs, trying to stay in place. So what I'm essentially getting at is that there's cooler weather on the way. All right, as we look up north across the Canadian prairies, big showers and thunderstorms, a lot of cool air pouring out of Canada across the northern tier of the U.S., particularly the Dakotas and Montana. And in doing so, we've got some thunderstorms erupting. Also, storms are erupting through Colorado and New Mexico. And then on the edge of the Sierras, we've got drier coming in off the Pacific. That's what the yellow represent, is a drier atmosphere. There's a scale somewhere up here. Maybe not on this map. I know there's a scale. But then the white are the clouds, and then the green tends to be the very tops of the clouds where they're saturated, cold, and literally just kind of full of ice. So we'll peel away that. We've got one tornado warning southeast of Rapid City, but a lot of showers just kind of scattered across the place today. And green indicating where we've got flooding underway, or at least some heads up for those kind of rivers and tributaries, and then the yellow indicating severe weather, severe thunderstorms in place across Colorado. And this baby does not want to animate. There's something going on. All right, here's the visible. And with the potential for some development, again, with that very, very warm water in place across the deep south. And I just saw this. That's a complete distraction. Have you ever researched the Dogon tribe in West Africa? Of course I have. Of course I have. And that's an interesting story for anyone else to dive in on, too. Just let you know that nobody is from here. And if we look at history through that particular lens, there's always a different perspective on stories and peoples and their originations, and then you really kind of wonder why we can't all get along. All right, here's the big bad storms in South Dakota with more rains. It's really been kind of a wet week. From Michigan, they got raked with big storms last night across Michigan into New England. But this is just another round continuing to roll through, and it's all of that humidity that's in place. All the greens, dew points in the 60s and eventually the 70s, but that moisture is feeding up, and we just keep getting these impulses that keep popping out of Canada, keeping the temperatures cool, 50s, 60s, 20s, mostly 20s if you're in the Celsius scale, and it would get down to the 90s and low 100s, where we would typically find this kind of heat this time of year. That's just typical. So When we look at the national forecast from the big guys back in D.C. at the Weather Prediction Center, looking at a couple of zones hashed in red where we would be seeing severe weather, and having those folks that like to chase the severe weather, that's where they're going to be found. And then the showers and thunderstorms. Look how much green. How much of the U.S. is under at least a 30% chance of precip, at least a 30% chance. The mountains, it tends to be almost a daily affair this time of year. And in their tweet stream, looking for rain over the next week, the southwest monsoon is forecast to pick up and offer some much-needed moisture across the region. Meanwhile, a few tropical disturbances are expected to swing across the Gulf of Mexico, and the latest 7-day forecast shown below, and then that gives their idea of where they're expecting the rainfall. I've got a little better map for you. We'll get to that in just a moment. As far as record highs, a few back in the northeast, Wallops at about 97 degrees, that Naval Center right through there. But and then nighttime lows kind of on the warm side. But really across the next week, nothing too terribly hot. Maybe even some cool highs as we get to Southern California, even Miami with some thunderstorms. FLL's, Lauderdale's, so about 87 degrees. So nothing exceptional. And what we're looking at is now we're beginning to see an Arctic low beginning to take shape across the far northern Arctic. And that baby kind of rotates, kind of sits there and keeps the jet stream off to the south. And across the bulk of the U.S., just this high remains in place. It is anchored, and it should be. It's summer. That needs to be there. So the activity continues just kind of through Canada, just little ripples. But they have this big kind of deep low, northern Saskatchewan, northern Manitoba, just sits there. And what that does is it keeps the precip in place, and they'll stay rather damp up there. The monsoon comes into place with the Mexican monsoon that's been going for a month now, a fat month now, and finally begins to work through New Mexico and Arizona into Colorado, where it has been dry. Other places that could see excessive rain, Kansas, and then along the spine of Appalachia. That's kind of going to be the big guys in the outlook the next 6 to 10 days. Cool through Alaska, warm through much of the U.S., and then a couple of spots where we see above normal precip, but much of the West appears to be kind of on the dry side. It's typically dry this time of year, but the mountains can tend to get some good moisture. It's certainly beneficial to those guys. But otherwise, it's just kind of another okay Monday, nothing too terribly big. China's got some impacts that we're going to begin to see from that on top of the COVID issues. And other places are dealing with flooding as well. This game of their floods is not quite over just yet. And we'll kind of get into that into another perspective. Not too deep. We'll kind of save that till we actually get a wrap-up of that, because it's really tough to forecast ongoing situations, especially when, for me, there's a language barrier. Then there's also a censorship barrier. A lot of information tends to bounce around inside that nation, but doesn't always get out in an unfiltered format, and that's kind of where we need it to be. All right, guys, good to see you coming on there on a Monday afternoon. And yes, Karen, thank you. You're just too kind. You're just way too kind. And I'll see you tomorrow, or what is that, about 45 minutes for another perspective. And we'll check in with you then. All right, everybody, have a great evening and keep looking up.